Welcome into the Sunbelt Syndicate Week 2 coverage. We'll go over Week 1 kind of as we go into Week 2. We will start out by saying that I went a 12 for 14 overall, and the two games I didn't predict correctly were still really close. So with that being said, let's jump into Week 2, and looks like the first game we've got coming up is Arkansas State going on the road to play at Ohio State at 12 noon. That looks like it's going to be shown on the Big Ten Network, with OSU being a heavy favorite. As we know, Arkansas State last week went up against Grambling. It's a very different outcome than what they're going to have this week. We predicted Arkansas State would win 42-13. They ended up actually taking that game 58-3. It was a great tune-up game for Arkansas State. Blackman looked just how he should look and was kind of in last year's form overall. And I would say that they did exactly what they should have done against an opponent as weak as Grambling, to be quite frank with you. This is the type of production and score line we want to see when we go up against lesser opponents from lesser conferences. He held on to the ball, didn't make any real poor decisions. So I would say he looked the way he should look. Defense looked good, didn't allow them to do much of anything. Grambling had 50 yards rushing and 52 receiving. They couldn't do anything. So Arkansas State did everything they needed to do. Now, how does that translate into what they're going to see up against Ohio State this week? Well, it's going to be vastly different. You're going against five-star recruits at a program who's used to contending for national championships. So this game's going to be quite a bit different. It's just going to be a really big challenge. I don't see them pulling any upset, but I do think they're a vastly different team than they were last year. Arkansas State's brought in a lot of top recruits. They've brought in a lot of transfers. This is not the same Arkansas State team that performed so poorly last year. So I do have them performing admirably, I'd say. And maybe this is even going to surprise some people, because I have it well under the score that other people are predicting for OSU to take this one by, the spread, I guess I should say. I've got Ohio State 31, Arkansas State 20. Yes, that's right. I've got it as an 11-point game. So I have that one looking pretty good. Hopefully they can perform just as we're expecting there in that one. At the same time, this coming week, we've got Southern Miss going up against Miami down there in South Beach, and that one's going to be on the ACC network. Miami looks to be a 25-point favorite. So we know Southern Miss had a really close game with Liberty last week. We called Liberty winning that one 28-20. Liberty ended up taking it 29-27. So, even closer than we had thought, but Liberty still took it in the end. We had questioned whether Southern Miss had found their quarterback, and sadly, it looks like that they haven't quite found him for sure. I know that Ty Keys is still going to be looked at as the guy, but they couldn't get much going. They really struggled to do a lot with the ball there. Liberty is a decent team. They're a good quality group of five opponent, but I wouldn't say they're head and shoulders above. And that's why it was kind of surprising to see Southern Miss struggle so much in the passing game. Now, they did run. I mean, they should just give the ball to Frank Gore Jr. every time. He had 178 yards and 2 touchdowns, and he even threw a few passes and was almost as successful as the starter. So, they are a rushing team, right? They run through Gore, and that's great, but they have to be more successful in other places. So I don't think that does them any favors here this week against Miami. They did have 3 interceptions against Liberty last week, so it's not to say that they can't keep it close. Their defense is coming around a little bit there, but Miami is highly ranked, expected to be pretty good. So I just don't know if they've got enough at this point in time to pull the shocking upset and beat them. So with that being said, I've got a predicted score of Miami 38, Southern Miss 17. I'm not even sure if they can get to that 17. I'm hopeful they can. I'd love to see them score more and keep that game even closer and more competitive. But until we know that for sure, that's what we're going to go with, because Southern Miss hasn't shown me enough to go any other direction at this point in time. Also, another 12 noon game. We've got North Carolina going down to Georgia State there in Atlanta. That one is on ESPNU, with UNC only being a 7.5-point favorite. We saw last week App State and UNC put on a show as far as the offensive fireworks go, and neither team having much defense to speak about. And then Georgia State really performed pretty well against South Carolina. You have to say that they got to bring the passing game along, right? That's what they were missing. That could have made them more successful there in that South Carolina matchup. You had Granger. It's hard to say he didn't play well, but he didn't play as well as he could have or should have for them to win. They outrushed South Carolina by a heavy margin. They went for 200 as a team, while South Carolina didn't even reach 80. So, they are we know they're going to go by the run, and we know that App State had a good running attack against UNC last week, so I expect Georgia State to be able to run on UNC without much issue. But they're going to have to improve those receiving stats and statistics there. Granger completed 7 of 29 passes. That's not good enough to get it done against South Carolina. It won't be good enough to get it done against North Carolina either. So they're going to have to improve there. I did really like the defensive game out of Georgia State. There was a couple times where South Carolina was actually moving the ball quite well for a series or two, and then they really just started getting them shut down. Even when they'd have one good play on first down, they would be able to stop them on second and third and force them to punt. And that's no easy task when you've got Spencer Rattler on the other side, because that guy's pretty dynamic and can make you hurt when he uses his feet or his arms. So for this one, I'm still going to favor UNC. From what I've seen out of them, I just think offensively they're really strong. We know their defense is suspect at best, at least right now. But if they get Josh Downs back for this one, I see the scoring barrage continuing. So I'm going to give UNC 41, Georgia State 28. But again, as predicted before the season started, I really think these first two losses for Georgia State will help them long-term in this season. And I think they're going to come into their groove and really improve after fixing things that need to be fixed once they get back into the conference slate. Next up on the slate, we have a 1 o'clock start on ESPN Plus, where South Alabama goes up against Central Michigan. And last week we know that they faced Nicholls and had a pretty easy game. We called USA winning 28-17, and they actually won 48-7. Again, great tune-up game for them in that one. Everything pretty much went the way they wanted it to. They didn't struggle. It wasn't very difficult of a game. We know now that Bradley is the supplanted starter. Went for 3 touchdowns in that one. Looked pretty good. Looks like Trotter even got some time there towards the end of that one. Went 9 of 10 really. So as we've watched the conference over the last few years, we all know that Trotter has been a consistent guy who can get the job done when needed to. But it looks like Bradley's going to take over that role. And let's see if USA can continue this attack on lesser teams. I know that Central Michigan is going to be a little bit better than Nicholls, but I don't know how much better. They might not be drastically better, so it'll be interesting to see how this game looks, how USA responds to a little bit better of an opponent. I'm still going to favor them in this one. I've got USA 37, Central Michigan 20, so chalk that on up for another Sun Belt victory. Next up, we've got Marshall at Notre Dame at a 2:30 start, and as always with Notre Dame games, that game is going to be televised on NBC. We know Marshall had a rather easy tune-up game last week. We called them to win 42-10. They actually took it 55-3. This one was never a close contest and never anything to worry about for the Thundering Herd fans. I know that Columbia got started on his way, looked pretty good overall, 24-26, very good as far as accuracy goes. Did have one interception, but otherwise looked really good. And Laborn and Payne really both took over the reins for Rasheen Ali. And, we don't know still exactly how long he's going to be away from the team, but we know now that Payne and Laborn can take care of the ball and are going to do just a fine job. So there's not going to be any issue as far as getting that job on the ground done for the Herd. And they did a great job passing attack through the air as well. Gamage is kind of the guy that everyone thought he would be last year. Seems like he's already in full swing this year. But again, we're going up talking about Norfolk State, and this one's going to be a little different with Notre Dame. Notre Dame had a very tough opponent in Ohio State last week, and almost, I guess I should say they looked good in the first half, and then they kind of lost it there towards the second. But they played Ohio State very tough. We know what we've said about Ohio State. Notre Dame's typically kind of close to that category. I would not put them up there in the top 4 national contenders year in and year out type of thing, but they are pretty close to that. So I think this game could be rather close. I think Marshall's confident going into this one, and I think they're going to want to perform very well there in that Notre Dame atmosphere, that Notre Dame crowd that they're so famous for having, packed stadiums. I'm going to call this one rather close and maybe even a chance for an upset for Marshall, but I am going to side ultimately with Notre Dame going with 21 for them, and Marshall coming in close with 17 on the board. So hopefully that one can stick to right where we think it could, and show the strength and power of this Sun Belt Conference as we continue on. Next up this week, we've got my favorite team, App State versus Texas A&M, ranked number 6 in the country. That game as a 3:30 start on ESPN2. As we all pretty much know, last week was a slobber knocker of a contest, all 12 rounds, and I think App State stood up at 11 count instead of 10 to keep it going. So UNC ended up taking that one 63-61. It was a great game to be at. The atmosphere was amazing. It was like a party, and obviously towards the end a little somber, but I think everyone was just amazed about how the game went. I don't see this one going quite the same way, especially down there in that Texas heat, mainly because we had question marks on the App State defense coming into the year, and they didn't successfully answer those, especially not in that first game. The losses on defense do seem to be pretty big. We were hoping for the opposite of that as App State fans, and we didn't get it. So we'll see what they can fix going into this week, but they've got a better opponent they're facing too, even better there than UNC. So it'll be a tough matchup. Texas A&M walked all over Sam Houston State, who's not quite in the FBS at this point, but they're soon to be there. So they've got some playmakers there, and they pretty much shut them down completely. So it'll be interesting to see how App can do. Can they continue to score at the same chunk they have? Maybe. Obviously, it's SEC defense going to be a little different than what they saw there against UNC. I do think they will score pretty well. I mean, they've got that rushing attack they're going to lean on. They've got the powerful offensive line. It's going to be a real big question mark on the defensive side, though. How much can they fix, and how fast can they fix it? I don't think they're going to fix enough fast enough to beat this Texas A&M team. So I've got Texas A&M 42, App State 28. Hopefully I'm wrong. I'd love to be wrong, especially since I called that UNC game incorrectly. So I'd love to get this one to swap over and go my way, and hopefully the conference way as well. Next up on the slate, we've got James Madison and Norfolk State. And obviously, for those of you paying attention, Norfolk State just played conference opponent Marshall last week and got shellacked pretty good, 55-3, as we've already mentioned. And then JMU came out of nowhere, really took care of business against Middle Tennessee. I had that one predicted as a close score, with JMU having 34, Middle Tennessee going to 31, so I had it as a 3-point game, and I was vastly wrong in that one. JMU crushed them 44-7. And there was really no question about who was going to take this game. It was never in doubt. JMU took care of business early and often. They've obviously found their quarterback in Todd Centennial. I'm going to go with his first name because I'll butcher his last name again. Percy looked good in that one, but Centennial actually outrushed him. He actually went for 110 yards. So he passed for 287, 6 touchdowns, run for 110. Just all-around great game for James Madison. There's really nothing that you could knock them for there. They had a decent return game. Defense looked pretty strong. So I was very impressed with JMU's debut, and obviously it helped being at home. So I don't see anything changing with them having another home game against a lesser opponent. I'm going to go with a pretty heavily favor for them in this one. I'm going to go with James Madison 56, Norfolk State 6. Next up, we have Old Dominion going down to East Carolina, 6 p.m. kick on ESPN. Plus, we know Old Dominion beat Virginia Tech last week, and we know for those of us in the North Carolina region or in the southern region, we know that East Carolina has taken care of Tech over the years as well. So this is like the two Virginia Tech beaters coming together to play each other. It also is an interesting matchup because of the light rumors, I would say, at this point. But maybe they have something to them that East Carolina may be a team that we look to add to the conference, or maybe they want to be added once they see how this new AAC comes in. But they just had a tough game against North Carolina State. They should have walked away with that one pretty easily. Their kicker let them down there at the end, missed extra point, and then he also had dinked one in off the upright earlier in the game to barely get one in there as well, and then had a chance to win the game there at the end with a long field goal. It wasn't even the longest of his career, but he shanked that one pretty good as well. So they're going to want retribution. ODU's coming off, a massive victory at home. I don't think they looked as amazing as I was hoping they would look. I didn't think they'd look amazing, to be honest with you. I guess we should clarify that to start with. Their wide receiving didn't really impress me. And Jennings is a great wide receiver, and they finally started getting the ball to him. But I heard a lot about Kuntz in this offseason, and I was really not impressed with anything he did or the fact that they couldn't get him the ball. So as far as the rushing goes, I think Watson is the truth. I think he's really what they've sold everybody he could be, and he was also catching some passes out of the backfield a little bit too. So they've got to get the ball to him at least as much and have him have some more success. He didn't even go for 100 yards in the Virginia Tech game, so they've got to get him the ball and get him some open holes so that he can take even better advantage of what he's given. Wolf, overly not impressive with him, so he's going to have to play a lot better and then get that, distribute the ball to those wide receivers that they've got. Defensively, I was very impressed. I thought the secondary for Old Dominion looked great against Virginia Tech, coming up with, I think, 4 interceptions. That's right. And some of those are more on Grant Wells. For those Marshall fans out there that don't love him, I can see why now. Some of those throws were horrendous. I'm not sure why he made some of them. But credit to the ODU defense for causing a lot of that, because they got into the backfield early and often and made him nervous and uncomfortable. And some of those throws were made because of those reasons. So if they can do that type of thing to East Carolina, they'll have some more success defensively. I just don't know if they're going to put up enough points offensively to take this game. But I do think it's going to be close. I don't think ECU is head and shoulders above, but I think ECU playing a tough ranked NC State team close that they should have beaten. I don't think Virginia Tech's on that level. And so with that being said, I'm going to favor ECU slightly in this one, and hopefully I'm wrong, but I'm going to favor ECU 20 to ODU's 13. And good luck to the ODU Monarchs. I'd love to see them come out of East Carolina with a victory, and also be very interested to see how many fans that you guys interact with down there may have some thoughts and feelings about joining the Sun Belt or what that could mean for them moving forward. Another 6 o'clock start, we're looking at Gardner-Webb coming down to Coastal Carolina there in Conway. That game on ESPN Plus as well. We know that Coastal Carolina was up against a tough matchup last week against Army. We called Coastal Carolina 31, Army 28. That score ended up being Coastal 38, Army 28. So we nailed the Army score. So pretty close game, just as we kind of predicted there. We knew Army's rushing attack was going to be pretty formidable, and we were wondering how well that Coastal could stack up against that. Having seen some of the triple option type offense in the past, we knew that it wouldn't surprise them, and we thought they'd do pretty well against it. And then, of course, they did. Grayson McCall looked good in his season debut, going for 3 touchdowns, and also had a rushing touchdown on the ground. Reese White is their everything back. He looked great. Pinckney, the transfer from Georgia State, came in, scored a touchdown in his first game for them. All around, a great opening for them, especially with the season that Army came off of last year, having 9 wins. It wasn't going to be an easy task at all, and it certainly wasn't, but they held up that Army rushing game pretty well and outrushed Army in total. So that bodes well for what they want to accomplish this season, and we'll see if that can continue this week with Gardner-Webb. I think it will. I think it'll be rather easy matchups, kind of one of those games you typically see the first game of the year, but you're seeing it in the second game here this time around. I'm going to favor Coastal in this one, 48 to Gardner-Webb's 17. Next up, we've got Eastern Michigan going down to Louisiana. That's a 7 o'clock kick, actually being televised on the NFL Network. So for those of you who have NFL Network, check that game out at 7 o'clock. We know last week Louisiana opened against Southeastern Louisiana, kind of in-state school who's looking for any chip on their shoulder to take advantage of in that one. That sadly for them, they didn't. Good for us as Sunbelt fans, Louisiana took care of business. We called that game 34-21. It actually ended up being 24-7. Louisiana took that one. This one will be a little bit more difficult, but I don't see anything crazy happening here. We'll see if they can take care of Eastern Michigan just as well. I don't know if they'll hold off the points as much as they did there last week, but I don't see a big scoring barrage happening against them either. I think Fields looking pretty good at the quarterback position. The rushing game's looking pretty solid. And the passing game overall, all those wide receivers they've got, they really spread the ball around. It looked pretty good. I expect a lot of that to continue. Like I said, I don't know if it's going to be as good as it was last week, but I don't think it's going to be too bad of a matchup for them. I'm going to favor Louisiana in this one, 28, and Eastern Michigan 17. Then also at 7 o'clock on ESPN3, we've got Alabama A&M going up against Troy Trojans. Troy tripped themselves up a little bit last week. We called that game Ole Miss 31, Troy 21. Ole Miss actually took that game 28-10. I think Troy ended up trying to lean on the rush game a little too much, and I don't think it was working. I think Vidal's a good, solid running back, but I don't think the holes were opening up as much as they needed to. I think Watson was trying to force too much. I think they needed to try and maybe move him around in the pocket just a little bit more to get him some better looks, because that kept breaking down there against Ole Miss. And Vidal was held for under 50 yards total, and they only went for 60 as a team. So it tells you the rushing game really wasn't opening up at any point. The receiving game ended up opening up more in that second half, ended up going for almost 300 yards total as a team. But they couldn't hold on to the ball very well. They fumbled it a couple times, also had Watson throw an INT there. Defensively, they didn't look as strong as I was hoping for. They did come away with one interception, but they just didn't get to the quarterback as much as I thought. They didn't have any sacks at all, actually. Only 2 tackles for loss, 2 quarterback hurries. The Ole Miss offense, it just runs fast, right? As soon as they get up to the line, they're almost snapping the ball again. That's just what they do. So that's tough to defend, especially when you're not having a lot of success. It gets frustrating. So it's understandable, but we were hoping for a little bit better showing from Troy. I think they rebound really well this week, much lesser opponent in Alabama A&M. I expect them to get back on the board and in a big way. They're going to take out any frustration they've got getting that back in order. So I'm going to favor Troy 42 to Alabama A&M's 3 in this matchup. Another 7 p.m. Eastern kick. We've got FIU going to Texas State, that game on ESPN+. We know that Texas State went up against Nevada last week. We called that one 31-20 in Nevada's favor. They ended up actually taking that game 38-14. So Texas State scored really where we thought they would, right there within a touchdown. And Nevada was the same way, kind of within a touchdown where we thought. And this one wasn't shocking. We kind of knew Nevada would be the favorite going into this one, and Texas State not really being tremendous overall the last several years. We knew they would struggle against an opponent like Nevada, who has been pretty good over the last several seasons in a good quality conference as well. I think Lane Hatcher, we knew he could throw the ball, but it's got to have a little bit better help all the way around. I mean, he threw 2 interceptions, didn't have bad completion percentage, but he had no running game to help him. Overall, for a team, they went for negative 12 yards rushing. A lot of that because Hatcher was running for his life. He's negative 43 yards all by himself. So it was a little surprising they couldn't kind of establish any type of run game there. The passing game wasn't bad. He spread the ball around when he could. But nobody had tremendous amount of success. I guess I would say Hawkins did. I mean, he had 96 yards and 2 touchdowns overall, and it was easily targeted twice as much as anybody else on the team. So he's definitely their go-to receiver, but they've got to do better about holding on to the ball. They had 2 fumbles, 2 interceptions, and that's not going to get it done against a team like Nevada. Hopefully they don't have that type of thing happen. But they will be going up against FIU this week, which should be a little bit easier, and it's also at home. So I am going to go ahead and favor Texas State in this one, 24-13. Hopefully they get back right on track and help show that the Sun Belt Conference is vastly different this year than it has been in years past. Just behind that game, we've got a 7:30 kick on FS1, Fox Sports 1, between Georgia Southern and Nebraska. You want an upset special of the week? Here it is, folks. Georgia Southern's coming in with a vastly different scheme, different coach, a few different players, but we still got the good ones that were there. I think they could upset Nebraska here this week in this one. Vantrease looked pretty good overall. Again, they did play a much lesser opponent there in Morgan State, so it's not the best way to match somebody up, but it was a good game for them specifically to get going on the right foot. They had plenty of opportunities and took advantage of them in the rushing game, and they also did the same in the receiving game. I mean, who would have thought last year at some point that they would more than double up their receiving yards compared to their rushing yards, which is what they did here, 367 receiving for 137 rushing. So vastly different team than you're used to seeing out of Georgia Southern, and so far looks to be very successful. Also, on the defensive end, we know that secondary was going to be good. We talked about that before. 3 interceptions in this past week's game against the Morgan State Bears, so they're looking strong there. Nebraska, now they did go overseas to play that game to open the season up, but they did not look all that strong, and I think they're just ripe and ready for an upset to come their way. So I'm going to go with a pretty big upset here. I'm going to favor Georgia Southern in this one. I'm going to give them 31, and I'm going to say Nebraska struggles to stay on the board there and only scores 21. So Georgia Southern coming away with a big conference victory and a big victory for their program, especially with everything they've gone through and all the changes that have been made there. We'll follow up this exciting matchup with what's probably going to be the dud of the week. I don't mean that as disrespect to ULM, but they're coming off a big loss to Texas, and then they play a team like Nicholls, which doesn't excite anybody. That's an 8 o'clock kick on ESPN3. If you're really bored, maybe check that one out. Obviously, we want ULM to win for the conference, but I don't think this is a big game that a lot of people care about as far as the big picture is concerned, especially with how ULM performed at Texas. I don't see a drastic change overall. Obviously, the Nicholls is nothing like Texas in that regard, but even a win by ULM here in this one isn't going to do anything to swing people in a big favorable way as far as the Warhawks are concerned. I think they have a decent quarterback in Rodgers, and I think he will have a lot more success, as will the rushing game, especially in this matchup with Nicholls. We do know that Nicholls only scored 7 against USA last week. I do think they'll score a little bit more this week, but maybe not so much. I've only got Nicholls scoring 10. I've got ULM going with 21. Getting back on track there in the win column, and hopefully they can turn this week into a successful one overall, and the Sun Belt can continue to collect some victories. And again, we got one big one hopefully coming our way with Georgia Southern taking care of business out there in Nebraska. I'd love to see a couple other teams here knock some people off. A lot of the big matchups don't have, in fact, none of the big matchups have a Sun Belt team actually favored. So we need to start winning some of these if we want the conference to look as strong as we hope it does. And hopefully that type of thing will continue. So until next time, we will get these out faster when it's not a holiday weekend with travel as part of it. But I hope you've enjoyed this week 2 preview. And until next time, we'll see you later.